listening to The Mountain Spirit, a podcast of Christian Appalachian Project, or CAP for short. This is a place where we get to share with you inspirational stories of faith, service, and compassion. I'm your host, Tina Bryson. I'm a firm believer that we're all connected by our shared humanity, and that finding that intersection sometimes just means having a conversation. Today we get to hear from Reverend Dwayne Mills, Executive Director of Appalachia Reach Out. He was named the 2023 Champion of Appalachia. We featured an excerpt from an early conversation with Dwayne, and we received such positive feedback wanting to hear more that we reached out to him to bring you a full episode. I hope you enjoy the show. And if you missed his first appearance in the Mountain Spirit, go back and check it out too. Dwayne Mills was born and raised in Martin, Kentucky, and he can tell you his family's history in the hollers and byways of the East Kentucky mountains. His home county became the face of poverty in America when President Lyndon B. Johnson came to the county seat of Inez in 1964. He was there to promote programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and Head Start, as well as promise to provide food stamps, provide more spending on education, and tax cuts to help create jobs. And year after year, journalists come to recount the poverty of the area while missing the positive things that make this close-knit community special. Dwayne's heart has always been to tell the good things that happen in Appalachia. Even though his education and early career drew him out of the East Kentucky mountains, his love for the people and his vocational calling brought him back. Martin County has its struggles like any other place, but it also is an area rich in tradition, culture, values, and natural beauty. Dwayne is determined to shine a spotlight on the place he calls home. He will tell you that he's been radically changed by God's call on his life, and his goal is to always point people back to Jehovah Jireh, our provider. Dwayne and his team strive to be Christ's love in action in all that they do. The joy of service is evident when you talk to him, as well as the special place Appalachia holds in his heart.
I was born and raised here until I was 9 years old. My father was a pastor, and so growing up in a little community in Martin County called Turkey Creek, which is pretty much right on the Tug River, which separates the state lines of Kentucky and West Virginia. We were poor growing up. You didn't realize it at the time as a little child when you're growing up, but as you grow older, you kind of reflect on those times and realize how poor we were. And I always tell folks there's a difference between being poor and living in poverty. Even though we were poor, for me, poverty is not just don't have money. It's poverty of experiences and relationships and all of those things that go along with living in poverty. I had parents who loved Jesus. My dad was a pastor, and so pointed me in that direction. And even though we were poor and we were on WIC and we had a garden in the summer, because if we didn't, we wouldn't eat in the winter months, of course. And so I reflect on those times as wonderful memories. I had great memories, a very healthy childhood growing up. In those days, the community was really centered around in Turkey Creek Church of the Nazarene. That was a church my grandfather with both great-grandmothers and three other people had founded in 1950. It was a clapboard Methodist church that sat right on Turkey Creek, and my grandfather with both great-grandmothers and a few other folk, they went and purchased that little clapboard Methodist church from United Methodist Church in Ashland, Kentucky for $175 in 1950 and brought it into the Church of the Nazarene. That's all I ever knew about our community was the church and the school and a community that just knew and understood what community should look like, a healthy community. And so was raised in that environment. And even though it was extremely poor, as many probably know, in 1964, President Johnson came here to Martin County and stood on the Tom Fletcher front porch and declared the war on poverty. And so Martin County has always been a pretty poor county. It's had its high points when coal was strong, of course. But for the most part, typical Appalachian County, especially in the heart of Appalachia. But the community took care of each other. When someone was down, they rally around that family or that individual. When they were celebrating whatever it might have been, maybe a mountaintop experience, the community celebrated that. And so it was truly and authentically what I would consider a healthy community. So I was blessed to be raised in that environment. I've been now back in Martin County for 11 years and came back to pastor the church for a little while and then stepped into my current role with Appalachia Reach Out as the executive director, addressing issues of rural poverty alleviation. And as I travel and speak and raise funds as an executive director for our nonprofit and represent our community and this part of Appalachia, I tell folks all the time, I think that the government has a responsibility to some degree. I think there's balance in it in supporting communities like ours, but I also don't believe it's their sole responsibility. I believe the church was created, and if you do much church history, you understand a lot of our hospitals, a lot of our universities was founded by the church many, many, many years ago. And so the church has relationship in community where government does not, but government has resources sometimes that community does not. And so I believe it's a both and. I believe the intentions of President Johnson and his administrations were probably good. But what happened, I think, in that time, and probably was happening maybe a little bit before that, I don't know, but the church, which was called to engage community, not have church within the walls of the church. We have worship service in a building, which is brick and mortar. But the church was always created to engage community. What happened is they pulled themselves out of community and so siloed themselves from engaging community probably like it needed to. But I think we get that wrong a lot of times in what I've experienced so far in the work that I do in rural poverty alleviation. This has always been home for me, even though I've lived away from here 30 years before we were called back. But my wife and I were serving at a university just south of Chicago and had a radical call to come back and to serve our people. I knew our call was more to the people than it was just the church, the same church my grandfather had founded, helped found, the church my father had pastored at, the church that I grew up in. It was at a place of needing a pastoral family. And so we felt like at the time, that's exactly what we should step into that role, that responsibility. But our call was greater than that. And it was to the people. And I remember interviewing with the church board and telling them, if you call me here as your pastor, know this, there's going to be many people that we minister to that will never darken the doors of our church, and yet God still calls us to serve those folks. And so that I was really passionate about that. So when we moved in July of 2012, we had what we call our first work and witness team, where we knew it was going to take people outside our county lines to come in and serve. There's many folks that want to have a short-term mission experience, a week long. And so we began to partner with those folks from all over the country that wanted to come in and serve and experience Appalachia. Many of those teams came from outside of Appalachia to come and serve alongside of us. And so we created an experience. And in those first couple of years, we would only have about 6 to 8 teams a year simply because I was pastoring full time and serving. But when those teams would come in, I would lay my full-time pastor hat aside and really engage our community. And through that experience for those first about 7 years, once I got to the place of stepping in the role of being executive director of Appalachia Reach Out, I knew there was areas that we needed to focus in. And so we did a lot of focusing in education. We would partner with our local school district, the Martin County School District here, and work in our elementary schools, our middle school, our one middle school, and our one high school to help a variety of ways. We've done everything from tutoring and go in with some of these teams and paint and clean and get the room ready and tell that teacher, hey, you focus on lesson planning. You focus on taking care of those kids once they get here. Let us take care of that classroom. We've landscaped schools. We've done a ton of work in the last 11 years in the school system. I've even had the opportunity to recruit a teacher or two for the school system because we are underserved in such a great way. The other area is addiction recovery. And so we do a lot of work with those who have been impacted, those who are in recovery, also those families that have been impacted. They've had a loved one who has been impacted by the use and abuse of drugs and alcohol. And so, including my family, I tell folks all the time, I don't know of a family that's from Martin County whose life has not been impacted because we're really the epicenter of the opioid crisis. And so we knew engaging those kinds of relationships would be really, really important to us. Of course, the short-term mission teams that would come in. And the other area that I knew as we continue to live here and build relationships and learn as we process through this was to do community engagement and leadership development, connecting with local government, sometimes having conversations with state government. We've had the opportunity to be at the table on a national level from time to time and representing rural America, especially since we are the place. Next year will be 60 years that President Johnson came and declared the war on poverty. So Martin County has always been that site, that area that people are interested in because of that. So those are some of the ways that we've engaged. Of course, I'm no longer the pastor at the church. We still attend that church. But when ARO opened its doors for us to step into the role of executive director in January of 19, I stepped out of that role of pastor and into the role of executive director. And we've just been building ever since. Back in the summer of 2012, we would basically ask for volunteers in our church to host team members that would come in for a week. We didn't have a place, like a general place to house those teams, except for homes in our church. And we were just a small country church, like I said, right on the state line of Kentucky and West Virginia here in Martin County in the community of Turkey Creek. And so we basically, for example, if we had a team of 25 coming in, I would try to find 5 homes that would host 5 people for that week. And it was just the way it kind of happened. If we didn't get enough volunteers, then they would stay at the parsonage with our family. And it was my wife and I and our 4 kids. And that worked pretty well until the summer of 14. We'd been doing this for a couple of years. And then we had a large team come down from Illinois, just south of Chicago, a community called Bourbonnais, a College Church of the Nazarene in Bourbonnais, Illinois. And we couldn't find housing for 26 senior high girls. And now, don't get me wrong, they did a great job in staying at the parsonage. Like I mentioned, if we couldn't find housing, they stayed with us. But I tell people all the time, you keep 26 senior high girls in your house with your 6, that's 32 total, for a week, and let me know how it goes at the end of the week. And so a couple days into that week, I remember looking at my wife and saying, you know, if God has called us to do this work, he's going to have to show up, because this really doesn't work for us in bringing these teams. It really does impact the life of our family. We're committed to that because we believe this is what God's called us to do. But God's going to have to show up. And he did. We had a family that started attending our church who were part of the ministry of Appalachia Reach Out. Appalachia Reach Out was founded in 1972. A lady by the name of Miss Jo Boomsma, who was an educator from the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. Before she came in 1972, in the late 60s, in the summer, during her summer break, she would come down in her 4x4 Jeep, and she was an interventionist specialist in education, and she would go in and out of the hollers here in Martin County and help those students who were really struggling. And then in 1972, Miss Jo felt a definite call to quit her teaching job and to move to Martin County full time. And so she did in 1972. So Appalachia Reach Out, ARO, as we call it around here, was founded a little bit over 50 years ago by Miss Jo. And so fast forward to the summer of 2014, we've been here for a couple of years. We're establishing ourselves in the community as a family. And Bill and Jana Zeidema, who was staff members at ARO, their sons began to come to our church on Wednesday nights because of our youth program. And then they began to come to our church on Sunday morning for regular Sunday morning worship. Well, as they were there and establishing themselves being a part of our faith community, they began to recognize the work we were doing and basically said, hey, we're a part of a ministry called Appalachia Reach Out. And we have facilities to be able to host teams. Of course, at that time, they were bringing in about 6 to 8 teams a year, ARO was. And they said, we have weeks during the summer and the late spring, early fall that are open, and we have facilities to be able to host those. We've got a bunkhouse, we've got some apartments. And so we just began to partner with them. I met with the executive director at that time. His name was Will Ruthven. At that time, he had been here for about 12 years or so, maybe 11 or 12 years, he and his wife, Jan. And met with them and began to talk to them. Long story short, we began to partner with them in bringing in teams. So no longer did we need those host homes in our church. And we would pay them per person per night for lodging. But then we would lead those teams like we were doing years previous to that. And so that's how we got connected to ARO and had that partnership for a couple of years until we received a call from their board of directors and basically said, hey, would you come to Western Michigan and meet with them? I made the 8-hour, 9-hour trip. They asked me to share our story, and so I did. And at the end of that, through a lot of conversations, they looked at me and they said, what would you do? Because many of us are getting ready to transition off of this board. Our executive director in a year or two is going to retire. We don't really have a transition plan. Would you be interested? if we gifted the property, the buildings, and cash assets for ministry, if something like that were to take place. Of course, I'd gone by myself, and I told them I would have to go back, share that with my wife. We'd have to spend some time in prayer. And so we did that for a couple of years, continuing to bring in teams and partnering with ARO. But through that time, that process of prayer and just trying to seek God's face of what was the next step in our journey in here in Martin County, in the heart of Appalachia, is this our next step? We had opportunities to move beyond this place during that time and trying to discern all that, because we knew if we said yes to this commitment, this is probably where we'd be the rest of our ministry. Through a couple years of prayer and just through conversation and wise counsel, we believed that this was what God was calling us to do. And so in the fall of 2018, we began to prepare our church for that transition of me stepping out as pastor in January of 19, and then ARO transitioning the board and all of that took place in December of 18. And in January of 19, I stepped into the role of Appalachia Reach Out as their executive director. This January coming up, it'll be 4 years that I've been in that role.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Does your construction business want to make a difference? The Lend a Leader initiative gives trained professionals the opportunity to serve our Eastern Kentucky neighbors who are living in substandard housing. Join our monthly mailing list to receive one-day opportunities for carpenters, electricians, plumbers, drywall installers, and painters. No commitment necessary. Email volunteer@chrisapp.org. That's volunteer@chrisapp.org to learn more.
Appalachia Reach Out serves over 120 families monthly at its food pantry and operates a thrift store for household items, clothes, and building supplies to increase access to necessities for community members. The nonprofit also partners with local schools to provide students hygiene items, coats, shoes, and so much more. Mills knows that the children are the future, and he does all he can to assist the local Family Resource Center coordinators to make sure that children and their families have all that they need.
Now we've been here long enough doing work and witness teams for 11 years. We've really increased our teams, the number of folks that come in and serve. For example, here in 2023 in our Martin County site, we were able to bring in, at the end of this year, we'll have brought in 30 teams here. That's close to 400 people, which is a lot of volunteer time in our community, whether it's home repair or tutoring or engaging with our community, whatever the ministry might be. A lot of what we do is based on the skill set of the teams that are coming in. We want to make sure that we create an experience for them. We also have a thrift store on our campus. Our thrift store is open 5 days a week, and that thrift store serves or actually helps us with ministry revenue. About 50 to 60% of our ministry revenue comes from that thrift store. It generates opportunities for our local folks. We don't have, of course, we're pretty isolated, so we have some neighboring counties that have, your Walmarts and different things like that. We don't have that here per se. And so some of our folks, it opens up the door for them to be able to get anything from clothing items. We have everything from clothing items to building supplies to used appliances to used furniture. And all of those are donated items that we receive, and partners that we have all over the country. And then local folks also donate those goods as well. Another thing that we do, we have a food pantry that's open 1 day a week on Wednesday from 10 to 2. We've seen that more than double in the last year. We were running about 70 to 80 families a year or so ago a month. And now I think last month we had 156 families that came in using that services. And so that's really grown for us. We also partner with a ministry here in Kentucky, and they're expanded beyond the state lines of Kentucky, called Addiction Recovery Care. We actually partner with them and lease about 2,000 square feet of our facility for an outpatient treatment facility. And then we also partner with a women's residential treatment facility called White Oak Hill Women's Residential Treatment Facility through Addiction Recovery Care, which the acronym is ARC on that. And there's 144 beds there that ladies go in. It's residential. So I have the privilege of serving on the advisory council for that. We do a lot of work with them there. We also have been a part of what's called Celebrate Recovery, which one day a week on Tuesday nights, we gather at Inez Free Will Baptist Church here, and some other partnering churches and ARO, some other ministries partner with that work. In October, we celebrated 6 years that's been happening. And then we partner a lot with our schools. We work hand in hand with our resource directors. State of Kentucky is very fortunate. This is not true for every state, but the state of Kentucky, every public school has what's called a family resource director. They're the first line of defense between the most underserved and the school district. And so we work hand in hand with them to help resource them with tools, whether that's hygiene items, food, clothing, those kinds of things. We've also been able to partner and receive some grants, and through the grant, be able to give them some dollars to help stock their shelves for food type items, especially like those kids that take backpacks home for the weekend to make sure that they have food over the weekend. We do home repair with our short-term mission teams, do a ton of home repairs. Like this year alone, with all those folks that have come into Martin County, we've done well over 150 projects. And that's everything from tutoring, like I said earlier, to home repair, to engaging our local community, to going to White Oak Hill here and serving those ladies, or Celebrate Recovery, just a variety of experiences that take place and projects that take place throughout a year. There's nothing more life transforming for those folks, but also for us to be able to witness that and to say, man, this is what life is all about, to see lives that were literally transformed. It's such a blessing to see that, and to see that for some of them, many years they're in recovery, and statistics show that if you're clean and sober for a year, the statistics of you staying in that place goes up substantially. Partnering with a ministry like Addiction Recovery Care that has had literally changed lives. It's a privilege and an honor for us to be able to do that. But our folks that come in and serve, one of the things that does, many of them, they have this stereotype of those that they see in addiction in their community. And when they come in and see what we're doing and how we're engaged, our heart with those teams that always come in is, we don't want you to come in, those mission teams I'm speaking of, we don't want you to come in and feel sorry for us. We don't need any pity. We've got plenty of pity. We want you to come in and partner with the work that we're doing. We're in this 365 days a year. But as you're here for those 6-7 days, we want you to see how we're engaging our community, especially in those areas of folks that we're trying just to give them dignity back, treat them as human beings. They see that, and those walls start coming down, and we do a session. Most teams come in on Saturday night and leave on Friday morning, and on Thursday night, I lead a session. The session's kind of the idea of it. So now what? What do you take back, this experience that you've experienced for a week? What are you taking back to your community? Because if you come here and experience all the different things that you've been exposed to, and you don't leave changed, then something's not wrong, I don't think, on our end. But I think there's something wrong in your heart, because you've been exposed to some of the most marginalized people in our country, and probably in one of the areas that's one of the most oppressed still. So what does that mean for you as you go back? And on those Thursday nights, when we hear people say things like, the walls have come down for me, those people that I now will see in my community that are in addiction, or even my own family members, I see that differently now. You guys have been able to expose us to something that help us understand that they're human just like we are. And we've made bad mistakes. And so have they. And so we're in this life together. And so treating people, understanding that they have been created in God's image, just like you and I are created in God's image, and we're no better and they're no worse, that we're in this life together, then that's when I know that we're making an impact. And that's ultimately my heart's desire, is just to tear down those barriers, expose people to that, have agencies in our community work together on the same page, not operate in silos. But if we can help in enabling those things to happen, then I feel like we're doing what God has called us to do. It is an honor for me and a blessing for me and ARO and the partners that come in and serve alongside of us to partner with those resource directors. I tell everybody that I can, and hopefully those that will listen to the podcast will know that these ladies are my heroes. They don't work for the pay. I can tell you that. They don't get paid a whole lot. And yet they're my heroes. They are in the trenches. They're doing the home visits. They're going and they know exactly what's needed and all of those things. And that's the reason they're the first folks that we partner with, just because they are on the front lines. I know that we are on the front lines too, but I really see it as a team effort. We're in this thing together. And so the resource directors that are there, they're the unsung heroes in our community. The impact that they make on a daily basis in the lives of students. I'm thankful for our teachers that we have. They're great and do wonderful, and they love their students. I know that. But these resource directors, when the 170 days are up of instructional days a year, and, the academic schedule and all that, those ladies continue to work even through the summer, even through the holidays, they're constantly working with these families, making sure that they have what they need. They don't have all the resources, and we're not able to get all the resources we can to them, but we try our best to help them as much as we can. Without those ladies, I don't really know where some of these families would be. And so I knew early on, stepping in as the executive director, that I wanted to elevate our ministry and service and what we offered to those ladies.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Your generosity has a direct and positive impact in the lives of people in need in Appalachia every day. It is the unwavering support of faithful friends like you that make this work possible. Many of our supporters are beginning to plan and envision what kind of legacy they want to leave to support the causes that are near and dear to their hearts. CAP is happy to provide a safe and easy experience for people to create a will and support CAP through non-cash gifts. Through our partnership with Free Will, CAP offers our donors the ability to create a will online and alter it at no charge. Our partnership with Free Will also includes their Smart Giving Suite, which allows donors to give through their IRA, donor advised funds, and stock online, in addition to creating a will for free. In recent years, Appalachia has faced unrelenting challenges, including the pandemic, inflation, and back-to-back natural disasters. You can make a life-changing impact and leave a legacy of hope in Appalachia. To learn more about non-cash giving opportunities, please visit christianapp.org/more ways to give.
All you need to do is spend an afternoon driving around with Dwayne Mills, and you will see how much he loves his community. His calling is evident, and he brings light into situations that can seem daunting to community members. Dwayne is there for the long haul, and so is the work of Appalachia Reach Out.
Miss Ramona put in a home repair application a couple years ago through our thrift store. When we first found her in her home or visited her in her home, her husband had died about a year before that, maybe a little bit less than that. And the home at one time was a brick ranch, beautiful home. But her husband had been sick before he passed away. And because he was sick and she was impacted with her health as well, they weren't able to take care of their house the way that they would have liked to. And so she had put out an application. And so myself and some of our staff went by the home to do a home visit, which we always do that for any home before we go in to work with it. We want to make sure it's a good partner for us. There's a lot of things that we do in that process. And so when we went in, the landscape had pretty much overgrown around the house. There was a big hole in her ceiling where the roof was leaking right over her stove. And when it would rain, she'd have to set out buckets all over the house. The back two rooms in the house, the floors had fallen in all the way to the crawl space. The bathroom was in pretty rough shape. Her HVAC system was no longer working because lightning had struck it. And I don't know all the details to all of that. But she was basically living in the front room of her house when we found her. She was actually in the kitchen area when we found her. She had broken her foot at that time, so it was hard for her to get around. And long story short, with Miss Ramona, over the last couple of years, we have just gone in there with multiple teams and have really, and these are her words, not only did you lift me up and help me get my house back to where it needed to be and bring light back into my house, but you brought light back into my spirit. And I can tell that Christ leads and guides and directs you all because it's evident by every person that steps foot into this place that Christ is the center of their life. And so since that time, we fixed the roof, we've taken care of the landscape, we've reorganized things, we've redone the subflooring in the house, in those rooms in the hallway area, and then another room, and then we've redone the whole bathroom. Literally, it looks like a different house from when we first went into it 2 years ago. When I say 2 years, that doesn't mean for 2 years we worked on it. It was just during some of those teams coming in, we would just hit a project here and there. And over a 2-year span, we're able to do that work. She's like a different person because of that, because people come in and want to serve, be the hands and the feet of Jesus, and go into those places. Not only was it a dark place, the house itself, but her spirit was in a dark place, a very lonely place. And so because of our staff and because of our volunteers, we were able to go into that place and impact it in such a way that it looks like a different place. And only because Christ leading, guiding, and directing us has that been able to take place. And so that's the impact that we hope to bring to every family that we serve alongside of. Some we're not with them as long, but the work that we do is a huge help to them. We want people to know that Jesus loves them. It's about bringing dignity back to those lives. Our call was very distinctive. When we were at this university, it was in a chapel setting. We had a preacher that day who made a statement. And the statement was, why would you be in a place where God could use anyone? Why wouldn't you go to a place where he could only use you? And in that moment, the Holy Spirit breathed Martin County into my spirit. And for most people, that doesn't mean a whole lot. But to me, a boy who was raised in Martin County, this has always been home for me, even though I was away for 30 years. It helps because you are from here. And a lot of these families, as soon as maybe they've never met you, but as soon as they find out, oh, you're a Mills from Turkey Creek. Oh, yeah, that connects into them. There's that automatic trust that's already built in. You don't realize it until you're here and you're working in it, that you see it. I can remember the first couple of years I was here and making some changes in the church, and I would have outsiders who would come in to serve alongside of us, and even local folks who would say it from time to time. They would say, preacher, you're able to get things done because they know you. It would take an outside pastor who comes in probably 5 to 10 years longer to be able to do what you've been able to do because they know you. They know that you're family to them. You're connected in some way, somehow. And so that automatically in itself builds trust. I think being a part of Appalachia Reach Out builds trust. I mean, an organization, a ministry that's been here for over 50 years, that's what I call staying power. They've created trust and staying power, and they know that we're here to help them. And we're not looking down on them. We're not judging them because we've all been there. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, born and raised very poor in Turkey Creek, I can relate. I can remember those days as a little boy. I can see that. But I also, as a little guy growing up, I remember those people in my life who cared genuinely for me. And it might have just been a person for a day, might have been for an hour, or it could be a family member that continues to speak into my life to this very day. But you never forget those folks. And I think going into those situations and creating those pieces, and to be honest with you, it's not to bring man's applause to us. I'm a firm believer, everything that we do, my heart's desire is to bring glory to what God has done in and through our lives. And so that's really the heart of what we're trying to do. And so bringing back hope into those hopeless situations is so vitally important to the work that we do. Our mission statement, so to speak, is to be Christ's love in action. The Bible says faith without works is dead. If I'm just showing up to a church service on Sunday morning and that's all that I'm doing, I don't think we're living as Scripture calls us to live. And we've got to live out that faith every day from the moment that my feet hit the floor in the morning till I pillow my head at night. Folks should know that my heart's desire is to preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. That's being Christ's love in action. Also, the Scripture talks about this idea of if we're faithful with a little, God will give us much, not as the world sees it, not materialistically, that's not what I'm speaking, but in the New Testament, Jesus came so that the kingdom of God could be established here on earth. So as he taught the disciples to pray, your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. So that's what we're to do as followers of Christ, being a part of Appalachia Reach Out, being Christ's love in action, is to bring that kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. People should be drawn to Christ through the work that we do. Not but just what we say from our mouth. There are those conversations you have to have, of course, but it's just living in community and loving on people and not expecting anything in return, and knowing that they have value, they have dignity, because as Genesis tells us, we've been created in his image. Every human person around the world that has ever been born, continuing to live, or ever will be born, has been created in the image of God. And so we are to care for them in such a way.
Our guest today has been Reverend Dwayne Mills, Executive Director of Appalachia Reach Out. We hope you've enjoyed the show and you will check out next week's episode. Tell your friends to check us out too. You can follow the work of Christian Appalachian Project on all social media channels and find the show online at christianapp.org/podcast or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. We'll see you next week.